The rope scraped against Zephyrah's neck as Judge Cornelius Weatherby adjusted the noose with trembling fingers. The crowd of Millbrook's finest citizens pressed closer to the makeshift gallows, their Sunday bonnets and wool coats creating a sea of righteous indignation beneath the October sky. But it wasn't their bloodthirsty whispers that made Zephyrah's heart pound. It was the thundering of hooves approaching from the western ridge. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Texas," Weatherby's voice cracked, "you stand condemned. For the murder of Deacon Fitzpatrick, despite your condition." Zephyrah's emerald eyes blazed with defiance even as tears threatened to spill. At 19, she possessed a beauty that had made her the subject of unwanted attention from every man in town, including the deceased deacon. Her auburn curls caught. The morning light and her pale skin bore the bruises that told the real story, one the all-male jury had refused to believe. "I defended myself," she whispered, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. "He tried to force himself upon me." A collective gasp arose as a lone rider crested the hill, his massive war paint gleaming in the sunlight. The horse's hooves struck, the earth like thunder, and the rider's long black hair streamed behind him like a battle standard. Tattoos covered his bronze chest, telling stories of victories and honor in a language the townspeople couldn't read but instinctively feared. "Sheriff." Montgomery drew his pistol with shaking hands. "Comanche," he shouted, though his voice betrayed more terror than authority. The warrior brought his mount to a halt 20 feet from the gallows, his dark eyes scanning the crowd with predatory intensity before settling on Zephyrah. Something passed between them, a recognition that transcended the chaos of the moment. She had seen him before, watching from the tree line when she gathered herbs at dawn, their eyes meeting across impossible distances. "I am Kalin of the Quahati Band," his voice rang out in perfect English, shocking the assembled crowd. "And I invoke the ancient law of trial by combat." Judge Weatherby's face turned ashen. "This is a civilized settlement. We don't recognize your heathen customs." Kalin's laugh was like winter wind through canyon walls. "But you recognize the law of Moses, do you not? The law that demands a witness to adultery, yet you condemn this woman on the word of a dead man who cannot speak his accusations." The crowd shifted uneasily. Several women began whispering behind gloved hands, and Zephyrah noticed how their husbands avoided meeting her gaze. They knew. They all knew what kind of man Deacon Fitzpatrick had been. "Furthermore," Kalin continued, sliding from his horse with fluid grace, "your own territorial law, established in 1845, recognizes trial by combat, when the accused has no proper advocate and questions of honor are at stake." Weatherby's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. The rope around Zephyrah's neck suddenly felt looser, though no one had touched it. "Who among you will stand for your precious deacon?" Kalin's hand moved to the tomahawk at his belt. "Who will fight to prove this woman's guilt?" The silence stretched taut as bowstring. Even Sheriff Montgomery had lowered his weapon, realizing that Kalin had spoken true. The old territorial laws did indeed allow such challenges, though they'd been forgotten in favor of newer judicial procedures. Zephyrah's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched this bronze god who had materialized from her dreams to challenge death itself. Sheriff Montgomery stepped forward, his badge catching the morning light, but his hand trembled as he reached for his gun belt. I'll stand for the law," he stammered, though sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool October air. Kalin's obsidian eyes assessed the lawman with the calculating gaze of a born warrior. "You would fight for a dead man's honor, knowing what he was?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Montgomery's wife Cordelia pushed through the crowd, her face pale as winter snow. "Harold, no," she whispered urgently, tugging at his sleeve. "You know what Fitzpatrick did to the Miller girl before she left town. You know what he tried with young widow Prescott." A murmur rippled through the assembled townspeople. Zephyrah felt hope flutter in her chest like a caged bird testing its wings. These people knew the truth. They'd always known. But Judge Weatherby banged his gavel against the gallows post. "Gossip and innuendo have no place in a court of law. The deacon was a pillar of our community, and this savage has no authority. Here, Kalen's muscles coiled like a mountain cat preparing to strike. Then you fight me yourself, old man. Weatherby recoiled as if slapped. At 63, with hands more accustomed to holding whiskey than weapons, he was no match for the Comanche warrior whose very presence radiated lethal competence. "The challenge stands," came a voice from the crowd. Everyone turned to see Dr. Thorne pushing forward, his medical bag in one hand and an old cavalry saber in the other. "But I don't fight for Fitzpatrick's honor. I fight because the law is the law, regardless of the man it serves." Zephyr's breath caught. Dr. Thorne was one of the few men in Millbrook she respected, a former Union cavalry officer who'd settled in Texas after the war, bringing with him skills that had saved dozens of lives, including her own mother's during a difficult childbirth. If anyone could match Kalen's prowess, it would be him. Kalen nodded slowly, respect flickering in his dark eyes. "You are a man of honor. I will not dishonor you in death." "See that you try not to," Dr. Thorne replied with a grim smile, shrugging out of his coat to reveal arms still corded with muscle despite his 50 years. The crowd formed a wide circle, their earlier bloodlust replaced by nervous tension. This was no longer a simple execution. It had become something primal, ancient, a test of truths that courtrooms couldn't measure. Zephyr watched from the gallows as the two men faced each other. Kalen drew his tomahawk, its blade sharp enough to split morning mist, while Dr. Thorne tested the weight of his saber with practiced efficiency. "Before we begin," Kalen called out, his voice carrying to every ear present, "know this. I have watched this woman for 3 moons. I have seen her kindness to wounded animals, her care for the elderly widow Brennan who lives beyond the creek. I have seen her resist the advances of men who would use their power against her innocence. She is pure of heart and deed." Heat flooded Zephyr's cheeks. He had been watching her, protecting her from shadows she'd never seen. Dr. Thorne raised his blade in salute. "I believe you speak truth about her character, but the law must be satisfied one way or another." They circled each other like wolves, testing distance and timing. The crowd held its collective breath as autumn wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying with it the scent of approaching change. Then Kalen moved with liquid speed, his tomahawk singing through the air toward Dr. Thorne's head, while the physician's saber flashed upward in a perfect parry that rang like a church bell across the silent prairie. The dance of death had begun. Steel rang against steel as the two warriors tested each other's skill, their feet stirring dust clouds in the packed earth. Dr. Thorne's cavalry training showed in his precise footwork and measured strikes, while Kalen moved like flowing water, his tomahawk weaving patterns that seemed to defy the laws of combat. Zephyr's hands gripped the rough wood of the gallows post, her knuckles white as bone. Every clash of weapons sent shockwaves through her soul. This magnificent warrior, this man who had emerged from legend itself, was risking his life for her innocence. "First blood," Judge Weatherby called out, hoping to end the contest before it reached its natural conclusion. "No," Kalen's voice cut through the air between a parry and riposte. "Death or surrender. The old law demands no less." Dr. Thorne pressed his attack, his saber describing silver arcs in the morning light. He was good, very good, but Kalen was something beyond mortal skill. The Comanche warrior seemed to anticipate every move, flowing around the physicians, blade like smoke around stone. Then Kalen made his first real attack, a lightning-fast combination that forced Dr. Thorne to give ground. The tomahawk's sharp edge whispered past the doctor's ear, close enough to trim a gray whisker from his beard. "You fight with honor," Kalen said, breathing hard but steady. "Why defend a law that protects the wicked?" Dr. Thorne wiped sweat from his brow, his chest rising and falling like a bellows. "Because without law, we have only chaos. Even bad laws serve a purpose until good men can change them. Then let us change this law now, with blood and truth." They came together again, moving so fast that individual strikes blurred into a deadly ballet. The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the primitive magnetism of mortal combat. Women covered their children's eyes while men leaned forward, hungry for violence. They'd never dare participate in themselves. Suddenly, Dr. Thorne's foot caught in a depression in the earth. He stumbled, his guard dropping for just an instant. But an instant was all Kalen needed. The tomahawk swept in a perfect arc, its blade stopping just short of the physician's throat. "Yield," Kalen commanded, his voice gentle but implacable. Dr. Thorne looked into those obsidian eyes and saw not cruelty, but mercy. He dropped his saber, the steel ringing against the hard ground. "I yield," he said clearly so all could hear. "The woman is innocent, and this warrior has proved it in the oldest court of all." A cheer rose from portions of the crowd, mostly from the women who had suffered under men like Fitzpatrick, who had bitten their tongues and endured because they had no champions to speak for them. But Judge Weatherby's face had turned purple with rage. "This proves nothing. A heathen victory over a civilized man doesn't change the verdict of a proper jury." Kalen turned toward the gallows, his tomahawk still gleaming with promise. "Then I claim her by right of conquest. She is under my protection now." "You can't just take her," Sheriff Montgomery protested, though he made no move toward his weapon. "This is still America. And America was built by those brave enough to challenge unjust laws," Dr. Thorne said, retrieving his saber and sliding it home in its sheath. "I've seen enough battlefields to know right from wrong when I see it." He looked directly at Judge Weatherby. "That girl defended herself against a predator. We all know it, even if we lack the courage to admit it." Murmurs of agreement rippled. Through the crowd, old Mrs. Brennan, the widow Kalen had mentioned, stepped forward with her walking stick tapping against the ground. "Fitzpatrick cornered me in my root cellar 2 summers past," she declared in a voice cracked with age but strong with truth. "Would have had his way if my shotgun hadn't convinced him otherwise. The girl done what we all wanted to do." Other voices joined hers, women who had been silenced by shame and fear, finally finding courage in the presence of a warrior who had risked everything for justice. Kalen approached the gallows with purposeful strides, his eyes never leaving Zephyr's face as he reached for the rope around her neck. Kalen's fingers worked at the knots binding Zephyr's wrists while she stood frozen, hardly daring to believe that death's shadow had lifted from her shoulders. The rope fell away from her throat, leaving red marks that would fade but memories that would endure forever. "Can you ride?" he asked quietly, his voice meant for her ears alone. "Yes," she whispered, though her legs felt weak as water. "But where will we go? They'll hunt us down like animals." A smile touched the corner of his mouth, the first she'd seen from him. "Let them try. The prairie is vast, and my people know paths your sheriff has never dreamed of." Judge Weatherby had been conferring with several prominent townsmen, their heads bent in urgent discussion. Now he stepped forward, his face a mask of righteous fury. "If you take her, warrior, you'll have every Texas Ranger from here to the Rio Grande tracking you. Is one woman worth such a price?" Kalen's hand moved to rest gently on Zephyr's shoulder, and she felt strength flow from his touch like water from a mountain spring. "This woman is worth any price," he said simply. "But you mistake me if you think we flee in shame. We go to bring truth to light." "What do you mean?" Dr. Thorne stepped closer, his medical instincts sensing something important. "The deacon was not killed in Zephyr's cabin as the sheriff claimed." Kalen's words struck the crowd like lightning. "I found his body 3 miles away by Willow Creek, where he had taken her to assault her in private. She fought him there, by the water, and when he struck his head on the rocks, she ran home in terror. Your sheriff moved the body to her cabin to make the case seem simple." Sheriff Montgomery's face went white as fresh snow. That's a damned lie. Is it?" Kalen pulled something from his belt, a piece of cloth stained with blood and creek mud. "I found this by the water, torn from the deacon's shirt. The blood had soaked into the earth there, not in any cabin." The crowd began to shift and murmur. Dr. Thorne held out his hand. "May I examine that?" Kalen passed him the cloth, and the physician studied it with the practiced eye of a man who'd seen more than his share of violence. "This mud contains sediment from Willow Creek," he announced. I'd stake my medical license on it. And these blood patterns, they're consistent. With a head injury, not the supposed struggle in the cabin. Furthermore, Kalen continued, his voice carrying the ring of absolute truth, there are witnesses among my people who saw the sheriff drag something heavy through the night. They thought him a grave robber and paid it little mind, until news of this trial reached them. Judge Weatherby's jaw worked soundlessly. Sheriff Montgomery began backing toward his horse, his hand hovering near his gun. "Harold," Dr. Thorne's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't make this worse than it already is." But the sheriff had already drawn his weapon, panic replacing what little courage he possessed. "I won't hang for protecting this town from a murderer." The shot echoed across the prairie like thunder. But it was Kalen who moved with lightning speed, pushing Zephyra behind the gallows post as the bullet splintered wood where she'd been standing. "Enough." The voice belonged to Captain Morrison of the Texas Rangers, who rode into the clearing with a troop of 6 men, their badges gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Drop your weapon, Montgomery." The sheriff looked around desperately, realizing he was surrounded by enemies and former allies alike. His gun wavered between targets before finally falling from his nerveless fingers. "We've been investigating Deacon Fitzpatrick for months," Captain Morrison announced, dismounting with practiced efficiency. "Reports of his behavior reached the territorial governor's office, and we were gathering evidence when news of his death arrived." He looked directly at Zephyra. "Miss, you're free to go. The charges against you are hereby dismissed." But Zephyra stepped closer to Kalen, her choice clear in the way she moved to his side. "I'm grateful for the justice, Captain, but my place is with the man who was willing to die for my innocence when no one else would fight." The crowd fell silent, watching this moment that would become legend in the years to come. A virgin saved. From death by a warrior's courage, choosing love over safety, adventure over the known world. Captain Morrison studied the unlikely pair with eyes that had seen the frontier's harsh realities reshape human hearts in ways Eastern parlors could never imagine. "Miss, you understand what you're choosing. Life with the Comanche isn't like anything you've known." Zephyra's hand found Kalen's, their fingers intertwining with the natural ease of rivers joining the sea. "I understand that this man saw truth when others chose blindness. I understand that he fought for my honor when my own people condemned me. What more do I need to know about the life I'm choosing?" A murmur ran through the crowd, some disapproving, others touched by the romance of it all. But it was old Mrs. Brennan who stepped forward again, her walking stick tapping authoritatively against the ground. "Child," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 8 decades, "I've seen 3 wars, 2 famines, and more heartbreak than any soul should bear. But I've also seen real love exactly twice in my long years. Once between my grandparents, who met during a Cherokee raid in Tennessee, and now here, watching how that warrior looks at you like your sunrise after the longest night." Dr. Thorne cleared his throat diplomatically. "If you're determined on this course, I'd like to offer something." He opened his medical bag and withdrew a small leather pouch. "Herbs and medicines you'll need on the prairie, and—" He hesitated, then pulled out a folded paper, a letter of introduction to a missionary doctor among the Kiowa, should you ever need sanctuary among the whites again. Kalen studied the physician with new respect. "You show wisdom, healer. Perhaps not all. White men have forgotten honor. Some of us try to remember it," Dr. Thorne replied. "The frontier tests us all differently." Judge Weatherby, his authority crumbling like autumn leaves, made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. "This is still highly irregular. White woman living among savages? It's against nature itself." "Nature?" Kalen's laugh held no humor. "Your natural law would have hanged an innocent woman to protect a dead rapist's reputation. My savage law demands that the strong protect the weak, that truth matter more than convenience." He looked directly at the judge. "Which seems more natural to you?" Captain Morrison had been quietly observing the exchange while his men secured Sheriff Montgomery in shackles. Now he approached Kalen with the measured gait of a professional soldier. "I won't pretend this situation isn't complicated. The territorial government prefers peace between our peoples, but they also worry about precedent." "What precedent?" Kalen's voice sharpened. That justice can be found outside your courtrooms? That a woman might choose her own fate? That disputes between our peoples can be settled without bloodshed? Morrison replied carefully. Your actions today, they show another way forward. The captain's words carried implications that rippled through the crowd. For decades, conflicts between settlers and native tribes had been resolved through violence, with both sides losing more than they gained. But here, in this dusty clearing, something different had occurred. Honor had met honor, and justice had emerged without wholesale slaughter. Zephyra felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. She was no longer just a woman choosing love over safety. She was becoming a bridge between two worlds that had known mainly war. Where will you go? Dr. Thorne asked practically. Kalen's eyes swept the horizon where storm clouds gathered in the distance, promising rain to wash clean the earth's wounds. West, beyond the settlements, to the sacred canyons where my grandmother's people made peace with the spirits of this land. There, Zephyra will learn the old ways. And perhaps... He paused, something deeper than tactical planning moving behind his eyes. Perhaps she will help us find new ways to live beside your people without losing ourselves. The crowd began to disperse, sensing that the day's drama had reached its natural conclusion. Some lingered, however, drawn by a story that would be told around hearth fires for generations to come. As Kalen helped Zephyra onto his magnificent warhorse, her arms encircling his waist with trust absolute, she looked back once at the town that had nearly killed her, then forward toward a future she couldn't imagine but no longer feared. The warhorse's hooves drummed a steady rhythm against the prairie earth as they rode westward, leaving Millbrook's church spires and false promises behind them. Zephyra pressed closer against Kalen's back, feeling the strength of him through wind-cooled buckskin, breathing in the scent of sage and something indefinably wild that clung to his skin. They had been riding for 3 hours when he guided the horse toward a grove of cottonwoods beside a meandering creek. The sun hung low in the western sky, painting the grassland in shades of gold and amber that made the world seem touched by divine fire. We rest here, Kalen said, sliding down from the saddle with fluid grace before reaching up to help her dismount. His hands circled her waist strong and sure, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of bronze in his dark eyes. Are you afraid? He asked quietly, his voice gentle as evening wind through canyon walls. Zephyra considered the question honestly, watching as he hobbled the horse near sweet grass and fresh water. I should be, she admitted. Everything I've ever known is behind us now, but when I look at you... She paused, searching for words adequate to the emotion flooding her heart. I feel like I've been asleep my whole life and I'm finally waking up. A smile transformed his features, revealing the man beneath. The warrior's stoic mask. My grandmother once told me that souls recognize each other across lifetimes. When I first saw you gathering herbs by the old oak tree, I felt recognition. He built a small fire as darkness gathered around them, his movements economical and sure. Zephyra watched, fascinated by the competence with which he handled every task, from selecting the right stones to kindle feeding the flames until they danced like spirits against the night. Tell me about your people, she said, settling beside him on the soft grass. Tell me about the life I'm choosing. Kalen stared into the fire, its light playing across his weathered features as he reached back through memory and tradition. We are the Quahati, the antelope people. We follow the buffalo herds across lands your mapmakers have never seen, living as our ancestors lived for countless generations. His voice took on the rhythmic cadence of storytelling. We believe that all things have spirit, the wind, the rocks, the creatures that share this earth. We take only what we need and give thanks for every gift. What about women? What will be expected of me? Comanche women are not property to be owned or prizes to be won, he said firmly. They are partners in survival, mothers of warriors, keepers of wisdom. My own mother led hunting parties and spoke in council meetings. Your strength and independence, these are treasures among my people, not shameful things to be hidden. Relief flooded through her like spring water. The life he described stood in stark contrast to the suffocating expectations of Millbrook, where women were expected to be ornamental flowers in their husbands' gardens. "But you must understand," Kalen continued, his expression growing serious. "The path we've chosen will not be easy. There are those among both our peoples who will see our union as betrayal. You will face challenges that will test every fiber of your being." "And you?" she asked. "What challenges will you face for choosing a white woman?" His laugh was rueful. "Some of my brothers will say I've been bewitched by pale skin and green eyes. Others will question whether I've gone soft, choosing love over warrior's duty." He reached out to touch her cheek, his calloused palm gentle against her skin. "But my heart knows truth, and I would rather face 1,000 challenges with you beside me than live in comfort without you." The fire crackled between them as night settled fully over the prairie. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled at the star-scattered sky, and Zephyra felt the sound resonate in her bones like an ancient calling she'd never understood before. "There's something else you must know," Kalen said quietly. "The old ways are changing. Each year more white settlers push west, taking land that has been ours since time beyond memory. My people face a choice: fight until we are all dead or find new ways to survive." He looked directly into her eyes. "Perhaps you are part of that new way. Perhaps the Spirit sent you to help us build bridges instead of walls." The weight of destiny settled around her shoulders like a ceremonial cloak. She was no longer just Zephyra Fletcher, the accused murderer from Millbrook. She was becoming something new, a woman who might help two worlds find peace. As if reading her thoughts, Kalen added softly, "But first you must simply be my woman, and I must be your man. The larger purposes can wait until we've learned to trust each other with our hearts." 3 months later, as winter's breath touched the high plains with silver frost, Zephyra stood at the edge of a vast canyon that dropped away into shadows and dreams. Below, the Quahati camp spread like a constellation of buffalo hide lodges, smoke rising from cooking fires to join the morning mist. She wore soft doeskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork that Kalen's aunt, Iron Moon Woman, had taught her to create during the long evenings when stories were shared and traditions passed from one generation to the next. Her hair, now longer and sun-streaked from months of prairie life, hung in braids adorned with eagle feathers earned through acts of courage and wisdom. "You have changed," Kalen observed, emerging from the lodge they now shared as husband and wife, their union blessed by both Comanche ceremony and the private vows they'd spoken to each other beneath autumn stars. "Have I?" She turned to face him, seeing herself reflected in his eyes. Stronger, more confident, alive in ways she'd never imagined possible. "When I first saw you in Millbrook, you were like a wild bird trapped in a cage. Now," he smiled, pulling her into his arms with the easy intimacy of love freely chosen and fully expressed. "Now you fly with your own wings." The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. A delegation was arriving from the east, not soldiers or settlers, but something more hopeful. Dr. Thorne rode at their head, accompanied by Captain Morrison and 3 other men Zephyra didn't recognize. "Diplomatic mission," Kalen murmured, his warrior instincts reading the visitors' intentions in their body language and approach. They come to talk, not fight. The meeting that followed would be remembered in both Comanche and white histories as the first step toward a new kind of understanding. Seated in a circle within the Great Council Lodge, representatives of 2 worlds explored possibilities that neither had dared imagine before. "The territorial governor has authorized me to negotiate a formal treaty," Captain Morrison explained. Through the translator, though Kalen and several other Comanche leaders spoke English well enough to follow the discussion directly. Not the usual land-grabbing document, but something different. A recognition of shared interests. Dr. Thorne leaned forward. "We've seen what happens when our peoples meet only in violence. Perhaps it's time to try meeting in friendship." Iron Moon Woman, the camp's most respected elder, spoke in the Comanche tongue, her words carrying the weight of accumulated wisdom. The translator conveyed her meaning. She says that the spirit sent signs 3 moons ago, an eagle and a dove sharing the same tree, natural enemies choosing peace over war. She believes your woman, she nodded toward Zephyra, is part of those signs. Zephyra felt every eye in the lodge focus on her, the weight of expectation both humbling and empowering. I've lived in both worlds now, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. I've seen the best and worst of each. Perhaps that gives me perspective that could help. What emerged from that council, and others like it over the following months, was something unprecedented in the long, bloody history of frontier conflict. Trade agreements that benefited both peoples, shared hunting grounds with agreed-upon seasons, cultural exchanges that allowed young people from both communities to learn each other's languages and customs. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, misunderstandings, and those on both sides who preferred the simplicities of hatred to the complexities of cooperation. But it was a beginning, a new story being written on the vast pages of the American prairie. 5 years later, as Zephyra watched her son, dark-eyed like his father but with her stubborn chin, chase prairie dogs with laughing Comanche children, she reflected on the strange currents that had brought her to this moment. A deacon's assault had led to accusations of murder, which had led to a warrior's challenge, which had led to love, which had led to a bridge between worlds. Do you ever regret it? Kaylin asked, settling beside her to watch their boy play. The life you left behind. The safety of your old world? Zephyra considered the question, her mind touching briefly on memories of Millbrook, its narrow streets and narrower minds, its stifling conventions and comfortable hypocrisies. Then she looked around at the vast freedom of the plains, at the people who had welcomed her not as a refugee, but as family, at the man who had loved her enough to fight death itself for her innocence. Safety is an illusion, she said finally, taking his hand in hers. The only real security comes from knowing who you are and where you belong. She gestured toward the camp, the horizon, the endless sky that had become her cathedral. This is where I belong, here with you, building something new from the best parts of 2 worlds. As the sun set over their canyon home, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that no artist could capture, Zephyra felt the deep satisfaction of a life fully lived. She had been condemned to die for defending her virtue, but a warrior's love had given her something better than mere survival. It had given her the chance to live completely, to love without reservation, and to help write a story of hope on the endless pages of the American frontier. Their son's laughter echoed off canyon walls as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, each point of light a reminder that some stories end not with death or sorrow, but with the promise of new chapters yet to be written.